I've always dug con man movies, and in today's movie, the con man, unfortunately, is kind of conning himself, and that's a problem. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, it's really good, after a long hiatus of sort, to welcome back writer, director Sean Durkin to talk about his latest film, The Nest. Sean was last in the screening series years ago for Martha Marcy May Marlene, which is an absolutely excellent movie. If you've never seen it, I hope you check it out. And I'm happy to have him back for his latest film, The Nest. And you know, it's a complex film. It deals with a lot of denial, a lot of searching for truth, and then deciding you don't like the truth and going back into denial. So there's definitely a lot to talk about. And Sean was very generous with his time and did a great job about telling us about his creative process. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you'll also check out Backstory Magazine. I have been fiddling nonstop to get issue 42 ready for you. That's our long-delayed pandemic issue. So it's coming out very soon. So now is a perfect time to subscribe. You could use coupon code SAVE5. That'll save you $5 off a subscription. And you could read us on a desktop or laptop or on our iPad app, which is called Backstory. And we'd love to have your support as we release our new issue. You also get access to our archive, which currently goes back to around issue 29, because we're putting issue 29 and 30 up this week. We're also kind of going back in time through our archive to get all of our old issues restored. And so currently it's going to hit 29. And so, look, it's a pandemic. It's a strange time to have a film magazine, but we're doing it. So your support would mean a lot to us. But now, without any further ado, let's jump into our conversation with writer-director Sean Durkin about his film, The Nest. Okay, so we're here with Sean. How's it going, man? Good to see you.
I'm good. Good to see you too.
When last we saw each other, it was many years ago at the Harmony Gold Theater. I did a Q&A and a podcast for Martha Marcy May Marlene, which I could say very fast, faster than most people.
Way faster than most people.
Yes. And that was a great movie. We'll get to that in a second. But just to remind people and give them a baseline for you, to my knowledge, you went to NYU. Is that right?
It is, yes.
Okay, and so what did you get the most out of film school? What was something that really appealed to you about your film school experience?
Collaboration and time. Great collaborators, friends. Not only, my former business partners, Borderline, Josh, Mondo, Antonio Campos, but also great, friends and collaborators all through the crews of the people that went up to make crews of our early films, and then also the time to have, I transferred there.
From where?
So I spent from a college called Hobart College in upstate New York. And so I basically had 2.5 years there. And I could just be completely focused on film and making movies and watching movies. And I had a job working in casting, and so it was completely.
What was your casting job like? Because those are some crazy stories. What was the worst audition that you saw?
I mean, the worst thing I saw, and I learned so much from working in casting. The worst thing I saw would be casting commercials, and I would run the camera, and having directors come in and just be total dicks, just like sitting back in their chair, like emailing while actors are auditioning for them.
That's terrible.
And it was just, I learned as much from seeing what not to do. Not that I ever would have done that anyway, but I learned as much from what not to do.
Why do you think they do stuff like that? Why bring someone in if you're just going to sit there and not even pay attention to like an audition? It doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't know. Just, it's a personality.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Inherently. So I worked for Susan Shotmaker, and I started off just, sorting headshot submissions, and but then I ended up running her camera and then running sessions for her, and worked on some great movies with some great directors, and saw great. Like, some of the actors from the film, like our early films were just like kids we saw coming in and who weren't getting roles, and I'd just see how good they were. I'd just like Chris Abbott would come in, and I would just feel like, why is this guy not a leading? It just like so I'd see these like young people not getting chances, and it became a big part of what I wanted to do, which was like, cast people in their first roles and things like that.
So that was smart. Actually, you took them into your student films, some of the folks that you liked.
Yeah. I made a student film with Paul Sparks and Rosemary DeWitt. And, they taught me so much in that. And so it was great, great experience having actors with that experience and who are that good.
Well, so, we did an entire podcast for, Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, and it was up back in the day, and I'm going to recalibrate a lot of my old episodes and launch I think it's like a new little app or some sort of Patreon or something like that where people could access them. But there's a lot to talk about it. I think it's still like a near perfect movie. It's an amazing film. What was your biggest lesson on that? Just before we get to this, what was something that you couldn't have known it really when you were in the thick of it, but given a few years now, what were things that kind of maybe had an impact on your creative habit?
So when I finished Martha, we put out, did a version of the screenplay for publication, and I went back and I didn't want to keep in everything that had been cut. So just
wait, why not? Why not? Because it's a great way for people to learn.
It is, and I might feel differently about it now, but at the time, I didn't quite have the confidence for that. I didn't want like things that didn't make it in the film to give the wrong idea of story or things. But what I found out was when we started prep, the script was 120 pages. During prep, I cut it down to 110. During the shoot, because of
sorry, you cut out for a second. You cut it down to what?
I cut it down to 110 pages during, and then when we started shooting, we'd scheduled 110 pages. Over the course of the shoot, just simply because we were running out of time, we had to make cuts on the fly. I probably shot 100 pages of the script, and in the end, when the movie was finished, and I went back and to sort of match the script to the movie, there was only 62 pages of material.
Wow.
And so I always know, like, I write a bit more than I'm going to use, and then I lose it on the day or lose it while I'm rehearsing, or but it was a big lesson. And like, well, not only have I just shot a bunch of stuff that's in the movie, and that's fine, but also just on such a tight schedule, like that means we could have done the movie in 12 days, And so what I did was I took that as a lesson of like, how can I make better decisions up front about script and what we're going to shoot that will not take away from days that could be spent on more important things.
Interesting. That's a fascinating lesson. So, you have this really audacious debut feature, got a lot of press from it, a lot of good reviews. And, I say this respectfully, people have an expectation of filmmakers often that they think they're just going to roll right into their second film. And this, the film that we're going to talk about today, The Nest, is your second film. Now, you had directed some TV in between, and you produced a lot. You produced Christine, the Sundance movie, which I really loved. Amazing character study, Simon Killer. So you had produced a bunch of other stuff, but this is your second feature. And sometimes it's an indication of an artist just wanting to take their time. Sometimes it's an indication of a project that was too difficult to launch and a bunch of other development hell stories. So what was your path in between Martha and today's film, The Nest?
Full combination of those things.
Of course.
So we were at Cannes for Martha, and a producer named Peter Carlton came to me and said, I just watched Martha, and I think you'd be perfect for a miniseries that we're doing in England, Tony Gersoni. And I had seen the Red Riding trilogy, and I loved it, and I spent my childhood in England, so it was a place I always wanted to go back to. So it felt like a very exciting. It was also about a shooting, and I'd tried to make a short film about a shooting years earlier. It didn't work out, and then it went silent for a year. Like I didn't hear anything from them, but sort of had that in the back of my mind. And then by the time I got through, promoting Martha and doing award season and all that stuff, I felt very burnt out, and I felt like, and it's tricky because I love it. I love communicating with an audience. I love being out there and discussing it, and it's a huge part of the process. But I was really worn out, and Peter Carlton came back to me and said, "We've just been greenlit. Can you come to England? Can you read the script?" And within a week, like I just took it on, and it was a part of that was being really excited by the fact that we would just have an air date, and I could go and make the thing, and it's just about the thing, and it's a 4-part miniseries, but I never saw it any differently as making a film, and in a way I didn't. It's funny, I sort of didn't think of the Nest as a second feature, because Southcliffe is essentially a 3.5-hour film broken into 4 chapters. And so I just didn't think of it that way really until very recently. But anyway, so I made Southcliffe, and that took a couple huge emotional impact as well. And my life, I sort of reset my life. I went through some major life changes, boiled my life down to a duffel bag, and so kind of started over. And so part of the time in between that and making the Nest was reestablishing my life on a personal level. And then I had several projects that I was trying to get made. I was trying to make a film about Janis Joplin, which I was involved with for 7+ years, maybe 8.
Wow.
And
was it just issues with the estate, which is what commonly happens?
Yeah, a little bit.
Like that?
Not the estate itself, but the producers who controlled the estate. I felt very misguided along the way at certain times. I think we got very close to making it a couple of times, and then other producers got involved, and ultimately, I think just we didn't agree on the direction of the movie. And so that, that.
Had you written a script?
I had developed a script with a writer, and yeah, and
what was the day that you left? What was the day that you realized you can't waste more time with it?
So the producer basically took our script and had his executives in his office rewrite it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's horrible.
It's unthinkable.
So it was almost leaving.
Yeah, and so they sent us back the script that his executives wrote, and it was just like judgmental and a bit. I mean, my whole thing is like I want to explore characters who are fully flawed and love them for it, and I want to make a film about Janis Joplin. I want it to be honest and if and I think basically what I felt was they wanted to make something more like Bohemian Rhapsody, but they denied that, and so it was just like it was clear that we weren't seeing things the same way.
They were trying to make a popular hit biopic like Bohemian Rhapsody,
but they didn't think that,
right?
And so we clearly had different ideas, not only in like content but also in language around what works and what doesn't. And so anyway, it was just, and also like a trust is broken when you're a producer and you have your executives rewrite a script so that you can control it. It doesn't work. And
no, that's pretty terrible.
I'm sure that works in a certain Hollywood system, or it used to maybe. but it was just bad news.
Actually,
all
it
the way
generally
around.
doesn't. It generally
It doesn't work for the end result, but I'm
Yeah.
sure producers get things made that way.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. I mean,
You know?
often they fire like a writer and hire another writer. Like they
Yeah.
do stuff like that, and rewriters. Like having an executive write it, that's some low rent stuff right there, amigo. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. Was there anything else that was going on, like another project that you were chasing, like that same time, or was that really the consumption of?
That was a big part. I really pushed to try and make that. I spent a couple years just being like, okay, this is the one I want to make. So that was tough. You know, and Michelle Williams was attached, and she's amazing. And she just like, you know, I'm not involved. I hope she gets to be Janis Joplin because I just want to see that.
Yeah,
if
that would be
nothing
amazing.
else. So, you know, I hope that works still.
Well, so, you know, look, I don't want to traumatize you any further. So getting to today's film, how did the nest first percolate for you? What are the seeds in it?
Well, while I was shooting Southcliffe, I was, you know, back in England for the first time in almost 20 years. And I was saying, God, this place is different. And it's similar to New York. London is similar to New York now. As a kid, they just felt like worlds apart. When I went to New York for the first time from England, I just couldn't believe it. Like it was such a different atmosphere. And so I think I started to just examine my childhood a bit and my time in England as a kid in the 80s. And then that led to essentially wanting to look at a family and how a move affects a family.
I mean, it's definitely a move affecting a family, but it's you know, it's really an arc, and we're gonna have a spoiler section. I'm just gonna give away what's kind of clear in the trailer.
Okay.
It's essentially a tale about a bad dad, and you know how what he does affects his family to an extent, and we'll get, you know, really into that later. But Rory, you know, played by Jude Law, he is a charismatic liar. What were the seeds for kind of showing that side of a family? Because it's definitely more than just like we moved to England story.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was about, you know, as a filmmaker, I don't judge my characters, and so I would never use, you know, describe any character as good or bad, but it is absolutely about deceit and about betrayal, and it is it's about chasing something that is bigger and better around the corner that may or may not exist. And so while he is you know, in some ways his and his family's own antagonist, it's more this I also see him as a victim of this culture that he has bought into.
Yeah.
And so that's where it comes from, wanting to explore that dream that you know, someone may think is their own, but actually is handed down to them from something else.
Yeah, you know, we're going to get more into that for sure in the spoiler section. But just to boil it down for a second about your creative habit, tell me how you start writing a script. Is outlining important to your process, or do you start without an outline?
Yeah, outlining is very, very important. What I try to do, I actually got right here. I'm at my desk, so I've got a collection of books, and I will fill one of these handwritten with any idea I think of, names, titles of the movie, characteristics, a piece of dialogue, a scene, an event, and I'll fill it, and I won't let myself go to a computer until that's filled. And basically when the book is filled, I'll go back through and start numbering, be like 1, 2, 3, just go through and be like, okay, so then maybe I'll have 150 possible scenes. And then I'll start to transfer those to note cards and start to build a bit of a structure. And then really try to be, you know, as sort of like away from the computer as much as possible. And then I'll write a draft in like a couple of weeks.
Do you use note cards? Do you use note cards?
Yeah, note cards. Yeah. So I go sort of from book to note cards. And on the note cards.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you have like any process that you like about your note cards? Because some people are like, well, I will only give, this many cards for Act 1, this many cards for Act 2, blah, blah, blah. Do you do anything like that, or do you just lay it out?
No, I just kind of lay it out. I sort of do the transfer from my, notes to note cards and sort of make those scenes and kind of sketch a scene on a note card. And then take those a step further when I move them to computer.
Okay. Yeah. And when you sit down to write, do you give yourself a page count to hit each day once you're in script mode, or do you try and do a certain amount of hours each day?
Yeah, I usually try for page count. I usually try to start with like 5 or something.
Okay.
And then, or if I'm feeling really sort of like, fuck it, I want to get this out, I'll go for 10. It just sort of depends. Like
that's great.
But it doesn't always work. Like I think when I do that, if I do too much, I'll look back at the draft and it's kind of pointless. It's like rushing through it. So it depends on mood, depends on, but then I'll get to a finished first draft, and then I'll kind of do that whole process again over for the second draft.
The process of journaling and taking it to out cards over? No, we're just
I'll recard the whole thing. Yeah.
So wait, because wow, that's a trip. Many years ago when I interviewed Anthony Minghella, part of his process was not referencing his earlier drafts, his earlier outlines and stuff like that, and trying to re-outline. And he had this weird idea in which, not weird actually, I think it's really cool, in which if he forgot something from his earlier stuff when he would look back at it later, he decided it just couldn't have been important.
That's amazing, because I feel very in tune with him and his work. I don't know anything about his approach. But that's how I feel. I feel if I forget something, it wasn't important. And I try to do the same. Like I'm writing a new script now, went through this process, read it once, and I haven't looked again. I haven't looked at the pages again. I sort of restructured it, re-outlined it, and now I'm going back in. And I'm using the script, but I'm not rewriting. I'm not like rereading it. It's a funny thing.
So you're like typing out, like retyping certain pages, like you're still using your script document, but you're just not sitting there doing a page 1 reread.
Well, if a scene's good, I'll leave it as is and just put it in and sort of scan it and be like, yeah, that works. So, then,
That's great. What do you do about writer's block if you get it? How do you handle it?
I get really grumpy.
People do.
Yeah. It affects my whole outlook on life and the world. What do I do? I don't know. Running. I can't really run anymore. I've got a back issue, so I run less. I try to watch stuff. Try to watch stuff. Or I cook a lot. I listen to music. Okay. I do dishes.
What films influenced you for The Nest? Did you have like a list of films that were kind of like pivotal?
Yeah. Shoot the Moon, Alan Parker movie.
Great. I love Alan Parker.
The Ice Storm. Don't Look Now probably was in there. The Shining's in everything. Rosemary's Baby's in everything. Alan Clark's films. When I moved back to England, I discovered Alan Clark, and that was a huge revelation for me.
That's great.
Yeah. And his films were so hard to find, and the BFI released this beautiful Blu-ray box set and also did a full retrospective the month before my daughter was born. So I basically spent my last month before parenthood at the BFI South Bank in London watching films.
That's awesome. That's awesome. The title, The Nest, what's it mean to you?
It's about home. It's about where you build your home and what you build it out of. And it's about, piecing together a home out of, it can be sort of anywhere, made from anything. And, it also, is purposefully has tone of, horror, in wanting to have a, these sort of notes of haunting, even though it's not a movie about a haunted house. I wanted to have that because I felt that was the psychological state of being in this family at this time.
Yeah, there's a time where a door is mysteriously opened and she can't figure it out later. That was interesting, for sure. Like it definitely had that trope, and the location of the house was fantastic. What's the budget and schedule? Because then I want to get into the nitty gritty with the spoilers.
Sure. Am I allowed to say the budget?
Under five or over five?
Over five.
Under 10 or over 10?
And
you can take the fifth anytime.
Just under. Let's say just
okay.
Under.
Okay. That
Fine.
works.
I'll get there. You got me there.
That works.
35 days.
Okay.
We did 6 in Toronto, which doubled for our New York location. We financed with a Canadian UK co-production as well as Film Nation. So we shot. We had to shoot in Canada, which was great. I mean, it felt just like, the location, the 2 locations we used there, it felt just like the parts of New York that I wanted it to feel like. So, or I guess we did 5 days in Toronto and 30 days in England.
Yeah, I mean, you got a lot done for 35 days. That's all I was going to say, because you have a lot of coverage. So that was great. Well, so listen, podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and of course, people watching on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, press pause, go rent The Nest. See it where you would get your VOD movies and other places. Come back, and we're going to talk the spoilers right now. So you have been warned. So, getting into it, really, there's one interesting thing here in which you were almost bringing it up earlier, but the antagonist here is really the anti-hero of Rory, and the havoc he wreaks on his family, intentionally or unintentionally. Either way, it still affects them. And that's a tough thing to write sometimes. You did it really well, because Rory is such a charismatic liar of sorts, to the point that, like, any person who perpetuates a lie, they have to believe what they're saying, and he definitely does. What were the challenges of writing an anti-hero like that?
Well, I'll start by saying I don't understand structure, and I don't understand protagonists and antagonists in traditional sense. And so another part of my writing process is that I will write a draft, and then I'll try to put it to some sort of like structural format and try to match up and sort of, who's the antagonist, who's the protagonist. And I can never really do it. I don't know why. It just doesn't my brain. So in some sense, that helps when writing something like this, where there isn't a clear protagonist and antagonist, because I'm not sort of stuck to those ideas. But at the same time, it is tricky. And it's one of the biggest struggles, because, he's also in some ways our protagonist who pulls us through. And so, but then I could argue it's more Allison's story, but ultimately what I wanted was a 50-50 thing. And I think I looked at it more like his ambition and this dream that he has is the antagonist.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's really fascinating about his dream, because like he will definitely not give up on it.
Yeah.
He is obsessed with that yuppie lifestyle, without a doubt, through this. You said it could almost be Alice and his wife's movie, which is interesting, because your POV here, something like Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene was very focused and, immersive. Here, you are shifting your POV to, between Rory, Allison, his son, and obviously his daughter, Samantha. How did you decide how much POV shifting you wanted to do?
It was tricky. It was tricky to know. Some of that was in the writing very specifically, and then others we kind of felt out as we were shooting, and made those decisions. And then some was in the edit, to be honest. I mean, I knew at the end of the day, I wanted it to feel like a 50-50 movie about a marriage at the core, and that the kids were, along for that journey and how it affected them. But ultimately, it's Rory and Allison's story, and about their, their matchup and their dynamic, and how it shifts, how it's one thing in America, how it unravels in England, becomes something else, it deteriorates into much more sort of, gender norms of the time, and how she then pulls out of that. And And ultimately, what do these two people have to go through to get to something truthful and to stop living in this sort of fabricated dynamic that they have?
There's an emptiness to the materialistic lifestyle that Rory's pursuing, and you mirrored that with your cinematography. You have a lot of empty space. You're often filming people from a great distance, outside through windows. You're really filming your empty spaces. And you just adjusted your camera subconsciously as I said that. But so how conscious of that kind of thing were you? Was that something that you were doing during your storyboarding stage or something during your location scout stages? Because it was a good way in which you weren't doing traditional coverage the whole time, which is always great to see someone break out of.
Yeah, and some of that just comes from wanting actors to have the space to work. I think I see performances just dwindle to nothing when they're just overcovered.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my overall philosophy is about that, but also I just space is really important to me, and one of the things I wanted in the house in England was to have open spaces so that people could feel small in the frame. And as many sort of big, beautiful, crumbling houses as there were to choose from, none of them had open spaces inside. There were very few open hallways in these houses, and so this one was really rare that happened. And so we walked in there and could just see all the way through. Every room had like 2 to 3 doors. It was just a sense that like Allison would never be able to, control her environment and make it safe. And so that sense of being small in frame was very important in that house. And then also letting the dark corners be dark and people fall into darkness, and that also felt very important and from the beginning part of the idea.
It's interesting because you speaking of Allison, you have this subplot with her and her horse, and the horse basically dies at a certain point, and they bury it, and it strangely towards the end of the movie comes back up to the surface in part, and I hadn't seen that before. That was really interesting. And you have this great scene of catharsis for Allison where she's digging away at all the mud that had been covering her horse, because it's like she wants to reclaim that part of her life again. What gave you the idea of this with the horse, and what the hell was it like working with this dead horse prop? Or was it a prop? Because at one point a tractor lifts up the horse and puts it into like a bulldoze plot, and it was like, wow, like those are images I have not seen before.
Yeah, and it's funny because in some way they're the most metaphorical in the movie, yet they're the most specific moments from my life. So the idea came from I spent a lot of time as a kid on farms, and we lived on a farm for a while, and there was a dead horse that wasn't buried deep enough, and it had eroded. And so we were out in the field, I think, and I think my cousins found it and came back and got us, and we went, and it was, the stomach of the horse had like come out because it hadn't been buried deep enough, and it had come up, and it was actually moving because of all the gas that had got in. And so it looked like it was breathing, and it was just like this horror moment, but it came from real life. And also the death of the horse too. My sister's horse, and my sister was a rider, and her horse died suddenly. Like she was lunging at her. I don't know if she was lunging or riding, but it had an aneurysm and just died. It like ran into a fence. And
that's terrible.
Yeah, so these were very specific details from my life that I've always wanted to incorporate, and became sort of central to this. And then the physical making of the dead horse was amazing. My production designer, James Price, he knew who to get, and he got this team to make it. And it was I think the single most expensive element, item in the movie. And it was just stunningly real, but we only had one. So we had to do both those scenes with the same dummy, and just hope nothing went wrong. We only did one take of the tractor.
Only one take. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was like one shot.
That's crazy.
And we had to get it right. Yeah.
It was a great scene, especially like her digging at it, because it comes at just the right time. Going back in time in your movie, though, exposition is really important. And, just like in Martha, here you give us breadcrumbs. And there's a scene where Rory goes to see his mom. And, you haven't heard a thing about his family. In fact, Allison actually believes that he doesn't have family in England, is a comment she makes to her mom earlier. So they wouldn't have a support group when they move there. And from my guess, it's been a minimum 15 years since he's seen his mom, a minimum 10, for sure, because his son is 10 that he mentions, and his mom didn't even know about him. But you give insight in which the movie seems like he's chasing the ghost a little of a bad dad and the childhood that he, felt cheated on. And you get a sense that this brother that we never meet also had issues as well. And then the mom defends the dad basically in that same scene. So, it tells us a lot without telling us too much. What were the challenges of that scene? Because, filtering in something like that, especially this late in the movie, which is the right place to do it, because it's unexpected, because we just didn't think he had a family. It was an interesting scene. I'm curious what the challenges were of, telling too much or too little there.
Yeah, it's really challenging, because I didn't want it to be some big tragedy revealed of like, this is the thing that happened to Rory that made him the way it was. Because I don't believe in that. I think even people who go through huge trauma, specific trauma, in my experience, it's not necessarily the trauma that causes the damage. It's the response to the trauma, or the lack of support around the trauma, or was one part of it. And so I didn't want to boil it down to some tragedy, because it just doesn't feel right or truthful to me. And it was equally important to think about just him visiting the place that he came from, to see that estate, to know that that's where he's from, and that's the class that he's from. And
just sorry to interrupt, just for our American listeners, when he said estate in British terms, that means like low-class public housing. Here in America, we think of estate as nice.
Exactly, yeah, it's like the projects. And so, and so he's from this place, but had to fight to get out of it. And I just want to have it. Not only that, but then with the mother, it's very English, this dynamic, this I don't know how to describe it. It's a lack of, I don't know. I wanted to see a lack of emotional availability, and that was the only thing that was really important to that scene. And even, when he lays out the photo, I wanted that to say more about her than it does about him, even.
And she's reluctant to re-engage with him for good reason, obviously. So, yeah. I mean, that was really well placed as well. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. If you've never read us before, you could check out our free issue over at backstory.net, which you could read on a desktop or laptop. You could have also, of course, check out our free issue in our iPad app as well. And look, it should tell you whether or not you want to join us by being a subscriber. And we'd love to have you. You could use discount code SAVE5. That'll save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. And it also gives you access to our archive. Our archive was zapped when we had to change software, so we are currently rebuilding our front archive. And, we're getting ready to publish our new issue, our long-delayed quarantine issue, which is issue 42. But our archive currently will go back to around issue 29 or 30. So we're just going to keep adding to it. The challenge is putting up old issues, one article at a time, like in each issue. That's how bad that zap was when our archive got knocked, versus publishing new content, which is really important. So we're doing both. We're burning the candle at both ends. We can't do it without your support, though. So we hope you consider subscribing to Backstory Magazine. You could also, of course, check out our blog, see what's happening. That's the free section of Backstory Magazine. So that's over on our at backstory.net as well. But look, we'd love to have you as a subscriber. We hope you check out the free issue and decide that we're for you. And thanks for considering. And, while you're surfing around online, of course, I hope you also watch The Nest. It's important to support independent cinema. And Sean, has waited a while for his latest film to come out. So make sure to go see The Nest as well. And speaking of The Nest, let's get back into our conversation with writer-director Sean Durkin. As you're getting into the tension between the husband and the wife here, something that was fascinating about it was, you could see it boiling over, in which, she has to keep money hidden from him because he's just going through their resources so fastly. And, it all kind of culminates to this business meeting dinner where she gets really dressed up for a night out. And, at this point in the movie, the horse is dead. He's not bringing in more money. We've seen her literally volunteer to work on the farm next door, down the road for money. And, in the middle of this fancy restaurant, someone asks, "Oh, what do you do?" And she's like, "I shovel pig shit." And, she just starts kind of taking apart this dinner. And it's kind of punk. I kind of liked it. And I was curious how far you were going to go. And maybe like some of the other iterations that maybe you didn't even film, but were in early drafts, because I always love hearing about that. I only ask because this is like an echo of an earlier dinner they went out on, where he assured her money's coming in, don't worry about it. And she just starts ordering a lot. She's like, "Oh, so we can afford this expensive dinner?" And she just starts ordering crazy stuff off the menu. And again, there's this great kind of punk moment where the waiter brings the wine, and Jude Law says, like, no, don't let her sip it. She doesn't know anything about wine, for the tasting before they give you the official pour. And she just grabs the bottle and swigs it and say, "Yeah, it's fine." And like, that was just a great moment. So I'm curious how far out of control you were going to allow her to get. Was there a draft where she went further? Because, obviously the dinner ends with her just getting up and leaving at a certain point because her husband is so full of shit during the entire dinner.
No, I mean, that's the extent of it, because for the time, especially, to, be in that role she's essentially been relegated to an arm piece for him,
right,
in this world. And for her to break that and not play along in any way is the ultimate embarrassment and betrayal for from his view. And so for me, that was enough. It was just that moment of breaking and saying something honest and not keeping up with his lie. Like, that's the ultimate liberation in a way in that moment. And so, and I knew I wanted to get to the dance and to drive home drunk and to, see the horse. And so it's also kind of, saving that and also keeping things inside too. I mean, this is like, still coming from a pretty repressed place. And so these are sort of, I felt the limits of the pushing the boundary.
There's always moments in movies where you see people like, "Oh, why are they doing that?" And, as she leaves the dinner, the person at the coat check-in, compliments her fur coat. And she's like, "Oh, you want it? You could have it." And you're just like, "Wait a minute, they need money so bad. Why wouldn't you just go sell that?" Like, where did that idea come from?
Just renouncing the nonsense, right? Like, these things don't matter. They're not real. They're not important.
That same night, Rory's coming home, and he's being driven home by a working class cab driver, and his character is basically unraveled because he's been humiliated at dinner. His one ally in the company has kind of told him he doesn't want him involved with the deal because he thinks he could still resurrect it, but without him. And he just talks about kind of his life and how he's trying to get what he feels he deserves, and how he once had $1 million and blew it. And it was an interesting, revealing scene to a stranger, because maybe that's why he felt comfortable. And of course, the scene ends with the cab driver having heard enough to know to let him off at the side of the road because he's not going to be able to pay for the ride, which I thought was appropriate. But tell us about that peeling back of the layers for Rory, because it was a very revealing scene. Again, it was short. It was just enough information, but I could see a lot of people struggling with it as to how much.
Yeah, and it's I just felt that for Rory, he got to a place where he kind of had to admit that, and it's easier to say to a stranger, because saying it to a stranger is much shame involved. Like, imagine him having to say that to his family, or admitting that to his family. It would just be so shameful. And it's set up like confession. It's set up the drivers behind this divider and looking the other way, and so no one's actually looking at him, and he's sitting in the dark, and he can say it out loud without any consequences, or what he thinks without any consequences. Of course, the consequence is that the driver kicks him out. Um, and I don't know, that felt right to me. But you're right; it was for a film that is very delicate with how it parcels out information. It was very delicate to balance these scenes, like the scenes you're touching upon, the scene with his mother and the scene with the taxi driver, and in the edit it was all about getting the balance so that one didn't repeat of another.
Editing is the last stage of storytelling. I'm glad you brought it up, because I was going to in a minute anyhow. And you had said that the big lesson on Martha was to throw out parts of your script, not to write too much. During your edit, did you find yourself on the nest having to throw out more than you expected, or did you take your own advice and write a leaner script?
Yeah, I met a middle ground on this one. I think there was still stuff that didn't make it, but I did better than on Martha, and it's a place I look to continue to improve.
That's great.
But also, it's also just accepting that's a natural part of the process. And like, you shoot a scene and you think it's really important, and you get into the edit and it's not. But there's no harm in doing it, actually. And it can really, shooting scenes that don't make it can really help inform character and place. And
tell us about one. What was a deleted scene that you kind of missed that was hard to cut?
There was a scene early on where Rory and Allison tell the kids they're moving to America, and the kids, their performance was amazing. I mean, it was the day where Jude and Carrie were like, oh wow, we just got outperformed by these two kids. It was a beautiful moment. I think it was a beautiful bonding moment for the four of them, and also like, just, it was a great moment of just everyone sitting around the table, just developing confidence, like the kids developing confidence that they can, not going to be intimidated to act with these guys. And they were so warm and took a parental role off screen with these kids. And so it was real family bonding, but ultimately wasn't needed, because you find out everything else along the way anyway. And also it felt more right that, Rory's made the decision, they're moving, and everyone's coming along. So there's nothing really to discuss. And that felt more right in the end.
Your musical choices were amazing. I loved the musical choices of the movie. Was there a piece of music that you had great difficulty with, or even something that you were surprised you were able to get? Because it was a great soundtrack. I hope you put something up on Spotify or release the soundtrack or something like that, because I'd love to listen to those tunes again.
Oh yeah, we haven't, but we should. It's a good idea. It was a lot of fun. I mean, music is a big part of the writing process for me. What I do is I build a playlist while I'm writing, and I kind of tweak it over time. And so when I get to prep, I send it to my music supervisor. And I remember her listening once, and she was sort of amused by some of the choices that I wanted, because they were really specific to me. And she was like, that if we do this, it's not going to be a cool soundtrack. And I was like, yeah, it's great. I love that. So it was a balance. So some of it was there. It was planned, like songs like Simply Red, like Holding Back the Years. Like, that was a song that I would play while writing. And like, there's a like 2 seconds of an Al Jarreau song in like, things like that really connected me back to my childhood, that just like remind me of falling asleep in the back of my dad's car. And so there's a sort of sensory thing that happens, and then mixing that with, more of like the stuff that they dance to, and just like a more up vibe, and then and then my playlist originally intertwined with Richard Reed Parry's For Heart and Breath album. So I wanted to mix like a bit of this sort of dark classical element to it as well. And so I knew I wanted him to be my composer for it. And then, so his music was always a part of the writing process. And then as we got into actually making the movie, you know, I'm very open. So like my music supervisor will send me, you know, replacement songs or ideas. And, you know, my assistant and I like would listen to music and talk about music, and he shared stuff with me, turned me on to stuff that ended up in the movie. So it was just like a very open experience of taking on suggestions as well as stuff I was really rooted to.
That's fantastic. You did one really revealing moment in which actually two that were great. Like that I just want to point out. How many cameras were you shooting with? Because I'm asking about this first moment.
Oh, only one ever.
Only one. Okay, because it would have to.
I don't believe in multiple cameras.
That's great. Well, so one of the things that you did that was really interesting was you have this big party scene with a lot of extras. And I'm jumping back in time. I apologize for not asking this earlier. And it's a moment where, you know, Rory comes to her and says his old boss wants him back early on in the movie, and they're going to move back to England. And at his kind of coming back party, his old boss is there and is hosting a very nice party for him. So you as a director have a nice room, you have a bunch of extras, you have a lot of things going on. And during the speech that the boss gives, you just kind of are in a medium shot already with Rory and Allison, and you're just slowly creeping into her face. We're not seeing any coverage of the boss giving a speech. And he's saying, you know, when Rory called me saying he wanted to come back to the company, and we're just like clocking her face. And it was just like a great reveal, you know, the first crack in, you know, the lies that she could call out of like, oh no, here we are again. Because, you know, she said they'd moved, I think 4 times in 12 years earlier. Tell us about like constructing a shot like that. Is that something that you storyboard, or you have shot lists in which you say like, look, we have all these great things. We don't need to focus on them. We only need to move in on her face for that moment of the lie.
Yeah.
Because some directors would overshoot it, as you said earlier.
Yeah, no, that was very specific storyboard moment. There's moments when I'm writing where I just know what the shot's going to be and I'll write it in, or I'll draw a sketch, a very bad, you know, stick figure sketch.
Sure.
And that will be like, it's like ingrained. It's sort of like, you know, what we were talking about before about like, you forget things that don't matter. Like when there's a shot like that, it's a shot and it's like, never going to forget it. I don't need to look again. I know what it is. And there's a handful of those throughout. And I just kind of latch onto those being the key moments. So I always knew that's what that was going to be. The rest of the party was more discovering on the day, like deciding Steadicam, doing that. But that moment, it's the turning point. It's the reveal of the lie. It's what you said. And it's about, you know, with the two of them, and then it just slowly focuses on her. And it's also just what makes the performance so good is giving actors those moments. It's like knowing when to let them just be and respond to something quiet as opposed to letting them express.
A lot of directors don't do it. Sometimes you see it more in indie films because they don't have time for multiple setups, but you know, it locks you into your edit. Like, because you know what that scene's going to be. You have no other options, and that's why some people shy away from it. But when people do it right, which you did, it's just always fantastic. I'm curious, did you have a lot of rehearsal time, or what are your views on rehearsal?
No rehearsal.
None.
No rehearsal at all. Yeah.
It always fascinates me. Okay.
So early meetings with each actor alone, and then one together. So in this scenario,
did you do a read through?
No read through.
Interesting. Wow.
So, you know, different with everyone. Like Jude and I, 2 or 3 in-person meetings, a lot of back and forth over email. Carrie and I met once, and then very minimal talking through the script, a few questions, and then Jude and I got together for a day, and then I got the whole family together for a day in Toronto the day before we started shooting. So, really, just about like chemistry and comfort, and me being available for what they need. But I really trust and believe that when I cast someone, I believe they're the right person. So I let them do their thing. And then I'm there for them as much as they need me to be. And I love it all. I love in the details. If someone wants to read through the whole script with me, that's fun. Great. Talk for months. Or if someone says, see you on set, I'll see you on set. You know, it's, so we rehearse in the morning. So we will just rehearse for the first hour of the morning. Only the scene we're about to do. I don't rehearse ahead. So
Right.
just focus on the scene, get in the room, find blocking, say the words, get it just to where we think it's going to be, and then just start shooting.
That's great.
Yeah.
The one big reveal that I thought was really interesting, and again, it was a good use of exposition because he's going back and forth with Arthur, his boss, throughout the movie. And Arthur, I am surprised Arthur took him back, to be honest. Like he does say that he's a very good trader. So I'm guessing that's why, a stock trader. Commodities trader. And it's interesting because Arthur just nails him. He says, like, you have a great sense of the big picture and where things are headed in the world, but you don't focus on the details. And the details are boring, and you have to focus it at 1 percentage point at a time, and that's what you fail to do. And it really just is almost the key to unlocking what's wrong with a guy like Rory in the stage in his life, in which he doesn't always put in the hard work. He's always chasing the easy deal. He wants the easy fix. It has tropes of death of a salesman a little, always like the next big deal is coming down the pipeline. Talk about the construction of that scene, because it was just information I didn't expect to get. You could argue that maybe Arthur is even a father figure to Rory, who didn't have as much of a father in his life. So that scene really struck me as an interesting one as well.
Yeah, their backstory was very much that. Rory would have worked for Arthur for years, been a father figure. And the thing I wanted to create in some of those early scenes is just like Arthur, it's fun to have him back, like they love each other and they have a good time. And that's really truthful to that time and place, I mean, so much of that business was lunch, like they worked until 11:30, and then go down the pub. And so much of it is, especially in Arthur's position, is just social. So he wants like Rory's a good time. He wants Rory around. So that side of it really made sense to me. And then and that seems very researched. That whole dialogue is very researched. Everything in the company is researched and based on sources, and that was a very delicate process of getting into and understanding that world. And then but it's all universal stuff. It's stuff I've seen my whole career, people who have great ideas but don't want to do the work. And it's, I sort of saw Rory as a kid who never learned to do his own homework.
I think that's a great way to classify him. And I know we're running out of time, so I got just a few last quick questions. But
sure, yeah.
Going back for a second on your research, just tell us, in your mind, if it's okay, what the change was that Rory was dreading so much about commodities trading in England in the 80s, because he's really, shook that some major change is coming that is dealing with regulations. And you gave just enough information to make sense of it, but as an American listening in and not being familiar with it all, what was the change? And by the way, was Rory right or wrong about the change?
Yeah,
he's definitely scared of it.
Rory's right. Everything Rory said was true and right. And so what I wanted to do was make him a character who actually had vision. He just didn't know how to accomplish it.
So what was the change that was coming?
So what happened in 1986? So England was there's things like England was highly regulated, and the government owned most of the sort of functioning agencies. British Airways, Electric, the trains, National Healthcare. And in the 80s, Margaret Thatcher sold those off. And it's still a major issue in England is the argument over privatization. So there was a sense that the country was for sale and that money could be made. And to go along with that, the markets were regulated. Only British companies could trade in England. And in November of 1986, it's called the Big Bang. There was a big deregulation. So suddenly, companies could come in from all around the world and trade in the British markets. And so, time of great prosperity for the rich and for the poor got poorer. And Rory, and this, it wasn't like Rory knew this was coming, no one else did. People all knew it was coming. What I wanted from Rory's character is that he's lived in America and seen the other side of it and saw it as an opportunity. So what's really driving Rory is his own personal desire to make a killing at this moment in time. And he's right, he could have made a killing, he just didn't quite know how to do it. So it's identifying the landscape and being right about that without knowing how to get it done. And so what then happened was a lot of these mid-sized firms, like Arthur's firm, got bought up by, American banks, started buying up these companies and forming these conglomerates. And then the commodities trading came, a small handful of big companies as opposed to individual shops.
That makes sense. I mean, that was fascinating. All right. Well, so what was your toughest scene? What was the toughest scene on the page, and what was the toughest scene as a director? On the page, what was the scene that you kept coming back to again and again, and how did you creatively rise to the challenge? And then what was your toughest scene on set?
I think the scenes that we've already talked about, the scenes with the taxi driver and the scenes with Rory's mother, are very challenging because it's like how much to give, how much not to give. So finding that right balance of what can be said and what's too much and what's that would have been on the page, probably the two areas I looked at that dragged on. But the research, getting the financial stuff, I felt a lot of pressure to get that right. And so that more than anything was the thing that I just kept pushing and pushing to the very end, making sure. And we had people who would check it and sort of say if it was right or not. The shoot itself was, there wasn't a lot of huge challenges, honestly.
That's great.
It's emotional stuff, No, it's emotional stuff. I mean, it can be draining to get into those scenes and watch things unfold like that. And, I think that, there was some technical stuff around the horse riding, but I had a great team. And one of the biggest physical challenges was the weather. I expected this movie to be half in rain, and there was not a single day of rain the entire shoot. So some days it was just looked like summer and it was supposed to be November, things like that.
Yeah, you looked out on Jude Law's walk back home when he's let off, at dawn. That was a beautiful shot. If it was raining that day, it would have just been a bummer. I mean, it would have been,
I would have loved it if it rained.
Right. It would have gone with the story, but it was great. A beautiful shot of him walking back. Yeah. Well, what's next? What are you working on next?
Got a couple of scripts I'm writing and a couple of TV projects in development, and so pushing on, trying to get something made.
Great. Well, I hope you do. I hope we don't have this much of a time gap in between projects, and you get your next thing made sooner, because it would be lovely to have you back. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thanks again, Sean.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Sean Durkin about his latest film, The Nest. And if folks, make sure to go see this film. You could find it online. You could find it in the place that you usually rent films, on VOD, etc. And it's always good to support independent cinema, especially now more than ever, as it's a strange time for filmmaking and filmmakers in general. And while you're surfing around online, I hope you also consider supporting Backstory Magazine, my passion project. We're getting ready to publish issue 42, our long-delayed pandemic issue. There's going to be so much cool stuff in it. And even after we publish it, there still might be a few things added, because I don't want to delay it any longer. But and then we're going to roll right over into starting issue 43. So there's a lot of cool stuff in it. I will probably do my own little mini podcast just to tell you what's in it, rather than talk your ear off right now. But look, it would be great to have your support. You could use coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. You could do that over at backstory.net. That will give you credentials that you could then use for our iPad app as well. But you can only get the discount at backstory.net. And, we're also restoring our archive. We currently go back to around issue 29 or 30, and we're just going to keep adding old issues into our archive after it got zapped. And it's going to take a while, but we're going to do it. And we're going to do it as we're simultaneously publishing new content as well. And our emphasis has to be on new content. So we're going to keep adding old issues, fear not. But thanks for your patience on that as well. And if you've never read us, of course, you could read the free issue over at backstory.net, or you could read it in the iPad app as well. And that'll give you a sense of who we are and what we do. And look, running a film magazine during a pandemic ain't no simple task. So your support would definitely be appreciated now more than ever. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. And of course, if you want to find me on social media, you could always find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter. And you could also reach out to backstory_mag on Twitter. I have a Facebook fan page. I check it sometimes. I'm really not on Facebook that much. I'm on Twitter more or less. A bit more. We even started a Backstory Instagram account. I got to tell you, I don't know what to do with it. What do you do with an Instagram account for a magazine? This is what I'm going to try and figure out now. So that's my other fun job. And, we have a lot of great art direction. So really what we're going to start doing is kind of publishing images of the cool layouts that we have in the magazine, because we spend a lot of time and money on our art direction. It looks beautiful. So I'll be doing that as well. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.